Hi, Lynn Kuo. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Leah. Thanks for having me.
So, I want to talk about a lot of things in your career. You are very active as a performer, as a violinist, but since the pandemic hit, you really pivoted in a really successful way online. And I know you have a couple different courses that you offer. So, if you want to speak to those, that would be really interesting.
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, it started off because I was teaching. I temporarily left my National Ballet of Canada orchestra gig to teach for just 4 months, just one semester at Memorial University of Newfoundland. And it was only a sabbatical replacement position. So I was supposed to return back to Toronto. And that would have ended April 2020. But of course, March 2020 started the pandemic. So I didn't get to finish my term and I got stuck, rather stuck in Newfoundland. So that's when I turned online and I saw a post by a friend, Tracy Friedlander, on Instagram. And she was advertising an interview that she was being invited to do in a summit, an online summit of musician entrepreneurs. So I watched the interview. And then after the summit ended, there was an invitation for anyone interested to take a 3-day entrepreneurial workshop. So that's how I turned my brain
Hmm.
from being a performer in the pit, and then I pivoted to being a professor. And then all of a sudden, my brain switched. Maybe it's time to start figuring out a way to teach online. And that's when my side started to turn on. And then after that 3-day or weekend workshop, I took a 10-week course. And that was the start of my first boot camp online. So I launched that summer violin boot camp in June 2020. And yes, it was a big success. I had 17 students from Canada and US. Yeah, and I was thrilled. It was my first time really becoming an entrepreneur. And so I've since launched two subsequent boot camps after that, one in the winter, January 2021, and then again in June 2021 as well. So yeah, and then I'm posed for the next one. So this is exciting for me because I can reach a lot of musicians around the world, not just in my city, not just in my country. I've been working with musicians as far as Philippines, New Zealand, Scotland, of course, USA and Canada. And it's really fun to connect with everybody. And they love connecting with each other, actually, because they learn so much from each other. And they span everywhere in age from teenage all the way to post retirement. And they're either students, graduates, professional violinists, and amateurs, extremely talented amateurs, actually. So it's really fun working with all of them.
I know quite a few other people that do these boot camp style things online, but often the content isn't in real time. It's like they pre-prepare videos that people have access to. Is that your format as well?
I have now a combination of both. So I have a suite of courses, which I call the Violin Ninja courses. I was going to launch them, but they are sort of uh, in a sort of limbo mode right now. So they're sort of not really launched, but they are part of the package of my boot camp experience. So my boot camp experience will be 8 weeks. I had one that was 12 weeks long, and anyone who signs up for the boot camp can get access to that recorded material. And it spans from violin technique, mastering musicality, which is not really addressed actually, how to express more sensitively and actually to expand your musicality. I don't find that many instructors actually discuss that. And then there's also discussion on practice techniques, which is also, I feel, an under addressed topic on exactly how to practice more efficiently. And then another component of the violin education is to look at performance anxiety. So I address all four of these, and these four cornerstones are what make up my boot camp and teaching experience.
Hmm. Thanks. So there'll be a link in the description of this episode for your website, and then all your current offerings will be there for people to check out. So, when you got your job as assistant concertmaster of the National Ballet Orchestra of Canada, Toronto, you were in school and you were doing your master's. And
Oh,
then,
and
yeah, but it's interesting to me because you went on to do your doctorate of musical arts, which many of I've noticed my young colleagues joining our orchestra here, a lot of them have doctorates because they stay in school.
yeah,
But to continue to get your doctorate while you already have a job, I found an interesting choice. It's a lot of extra work.
yeah, you're right about that. Actually, my health really suffered actually while I was doing work and a doctorate at the same time. In fact, I actually kept it a secret the first 2 years until it finally started to leak out to people in my work circles that I was pursuing a degree, an academic degree. I didn't want people to know that I had returned to being a student. I mean, I had graduated, won my job, had been out of academia for, I can't remember now, 7 years or something. So I
Okay.
was fully professional, you're right, in my National Ballet job. And then I got invited by a professor at the University of Toronto, Dennis Patrick. He basically recruited me. He said, Lynn, I think you'd be a very suitable candidate for this program. And you don't live far from the campus. You're very active in terms of improving your playing, learning. You'd be a very suitable person for this new inaugural program. And I was the first person as a string player to graduate from U of T with a DMA. So I was the first string player. And it nearly killed me to be working and writing a dissertation. I would play literally a show of Swan Lake, end at about almost 11 p.m., come home and open up the laptop and start working on a chapter. It was really, really tough. I remember, Leah, I remember this finger, this bow hold finger, it swelled up like a sausage and it was so puffy that this knuckle, I could barely bend this knuckle around my bow. And that was from stress. I have a friend, a very dear childhood friend, and she also got her PhD at U of T. I showed her a picture of my finger. She said, yep, that happened to me too. So I'll call it the DMA finger,
Yeah.
the doctor finger. It was really stressful. Yeah. But I managed. And 4.5 years later, I got it. Barely alive. But yeah, and I remember the day after my convocation, I had posted some photos online on social media. And I remember I walked into a National Ballet rehearsal, and my colleagues who are my connections on social media knew that I had just convocated. And I remember walking in and they were all cheering for me at the rehearsal because it was quite the journey. I was always so stressed out, so tired.
So,
Yeah.
what was your dissertation about?
I wrote it on holistic health and injury prevention in orchestral musicians. It was more of a qualitative uh, study, so it was more interview style. It wasn't meant to be quantitative data or anything like that. I interviewed musicians and asked them about their real lived experiences with injury, preventing injury, and looking at all the different things that they do or don't do or that contribute to the experience of their injury, the occurrence of their injury, and what helped them overcome the injury. So I wanted to actually get the actual words of their personal lived experiences. I thought that was very useful. And I was surprised after I started to get some random checks in the mail for something like $3.29. It was actually downloaded by people off the internet. It was really funny.
I don't understand about the checks. Like,
Oh, so when you publish a dissertation, people
oh,
can actually
okay.
purchase the dissertation. Yeah, so these checks came from U of T saying someone has purchased your dissertation. So I was
Okay.
quite amused. I don't think I cashed it. I think I just put it on my bulletin board and laughed at it.
You know, you'd mentioned your inflammation of your finger that you relate to stress, which I can really relate to. And in my experience, some serious, issues I directly related to stress. And when I dealt with
Hmm.
mind-body connection, I was able to solve these quite serious problems. But I feel like a lot of musicians aren't aware of that as much as they should be.
Really, you feel like there's a lack of awareness?
Yeah, I think a lot of people blame the job. They think we're playing too many hours, or you know what I mean. I think that's a lot of the mentality, and of course, it can be difficult when people have different situations. And I don't mean to pass any judgment at all, but I do think that in my own lived experience, is just to say that it's our mind can do tricky things and
Mm.
create inflammation actually, and yeah, it was. I won't go into my personal story. It's not the place for it, but I just was curious about, yeah, if you had dealt sort of, if you mentioned performance anxiety before and injury prevention, if you talk about that mind body connection at all.
Oh yeah, I started reading lots of those kinds of books, and I personally experienced it. And ironically, through writing my thesis, I lived through that experience. Well, first of all, I was inspired to write the dissertation because I myself was experiencing injury myself and repetitive strain mostly, and it wasn't pain, it wasn't tingling or numbness, it was loss of stamina and loss of strength.
Mhm.
And I discovered that there were a bunch of things that were in play, not just not just physical kinesthetic and setup and posture, which is often what people go to. What's your shoulder rest? What's your chin rest? What's your posture? Those things are extremely important. But then I started to realize in the process of writing my pieces that stress, mental perception of life's events, right? Mental perception, as you just said, of the job. What stressors are in the job? What stressors do orchestral musicians experience on a day-to-day basis in the occupation? And these things can contribute to your psychological stress, which then creates a physical, a somatic experience of tightening muscle tension, right? And muscle tension will then create fatigue. And I talked about co-contraction, especially in the flexors and the extensors. So when this co-contraction happens, and this is exactly what happened to me, when you're in a fight or flight state, stressed out, then your muscles are going to remain in this tense state. So I had to learn that myself. So in the process of writing my pieces, I actually healed myself in a way. I don't think I've really been injured since writing and completing my pieces. So it was actually very healing for me, if not helpful for anyone else. So yeah, it really helped me when I wrote this piece, this work. And I discovered how important it is to not just address one aspect of preventing injury. Like you said, it's really important to have everything involved in terms of treating life and looking at it in a lens that allows you to remain healthy. So for me, that means positive positive outlook, and that encompasses daily practices and rituals. Like, what do you say to yourself? Self-talk, which I mentioned in my performance anxiety course, and also incorporates daily rituals, just like taking moments to do a mini meditation. And if it doesn't have to be a religious thing, it could be very non-secular. Meditation can simply be a moment to focus, and you can treat it as if you are about to perform on stage, and you don't have to call it a meditation, but you can call it a breathing exercise, a focusing exercise. And in the process of doing a breathing and focusing exercise, wow, you're actually allowing the parasympathetic nervous system to work for you, for your benefit, to calm your whole body. And wow, when you calm the whole body, then maybe you're getting that much further into decreasing the stress hormones being released into your body. No less cortisol, and this is all beneficial for the entire your digestion, your muscle tension, muscle relaxation, and also just even your mental mind state before you step out on stage. So it's a work in progress for everybody, I know, and some people I think are more affected than others in terms of injury prevention and also in terms of performance anxiety. But I think all of us can benefit from these little practices. It can be open to improving if you incorporate some of these practices. So I continue to do these things, and I continue to teach them and pass them along to my students.
Yeah. It's interesting about performance anxiety because with the pandemic, most symphony orchestras and chamber music groups, we've been doing live streams. And it's a different kind of suddenly attention. You don't know if the camera's going to be on you. And I've talked to a few colleagues in different places that have felt like a new performance anxiety they didn't feel before. Because it's not just you go and you play your concert and you're in the moment. It's like, oh, might be out there forever. And what if, I'm suddenly doing the wrong bowing or something silly like that you wouldn't normally.
Right. Yeah, that's a real stressor. It was funny when I was looking at literature written on musicians and stressors in our occupation. And I guess this will be added as a new one, the potential permanence, a permanent record of our performance. And that will have to be added now with the advent of live streaming and video recording. Before I was looking at this body of research saying, I think it was a Finnish dissertation actually, written in 2008 or something. And the number one stressor for orchestral musicians, I believe, was judgment by your peers.
Yeah.
Solos. When you play a solo, right? That's when you're afraid of judgment. That one, I think, was the number one stressor for orchestral musicians.
Mm-hmm. I remember, I'm older than you, but when I was starting to do auditions, the position that you won was often open. And I was going to do that, but of course it was like this weird list. If you're not used to the ballet repertoire, I was like, I don't know this stuff. I'm not. So congratulations on getting that.
Thank you.
I interviewed your colleague Erin in season 1, So
Yes.
you're kind of his understudy in terms of solos, like
Yes.
if he's suddenly ill.
Yes.
So what's that feeling like of being assistant and knowing that you have to be on the ball for very difficult solos?
Well, that is really cute that you mentioned that my position has been open for a long time, and it was jokingly called the ejector seat
Hmm.
before. So I'm glad you concur. It really was known as the ejector seat. And when I got the job, I was very green. And I remember when I did win the job, someone said, she also took the audition. She said to me, "Now you've got to learn all the solos." And I thought, what did I just walk into? So yes, I remember my first time having to deal with this. Well, actually, my first day on the job, I was put into the concertmaster chair for Nutcracker, and I I was quite literally the only person in the orchestra who had never played Nutcracker. That first day on my job, it was really funny, and I missed a repeat. Everyone knew this repeat. It was a repeat of 5 times,
Yeah.
and it's when the kids are opening up their gifts in Act One.
Hmm.
And I think Uncle Nikolai, I think, is doing some tricks. I think, and it goes 5 times, 5 times. And you really have to keep, or 6 times. You have to really keep your eye and count. And of course, I missed it. It was really funny. Then the next time, um, well, the concertmaster at the time was Fujiko Imajishi, and she became ill. And this is the time before cell phones. I was still a student. I remember this because I was in the basement of University of Toronto practicing. I did not own a cell phone. At those times, we had answering machines.
Hmm.
So I remember thinking, okay, I think I will go early, bring my dinner to the theater, and just warm up. And I got to the theater at the time. It was called Hummingbird Center, which is now O'Keefe Center in Toronto. And I think it was the personnel manager, Jean Birch, who's now no longer with us. She said, "Fujiko's not here. She's sick. You have to step up Swan Lake." Swan Lake's got two big solos, the White Swan and the Black Swan, and Russian Dance, 3 solos. So I thought, okay, there goes my dinner. So, yeah, that was my first time, and I from then on I got a cell phone. Yeah, it's been scary. So yeah, I remember thinking from then on that my job really should be. It felt to me anyway like it was like I was a first emergency responder. Like if that siren right now, I hear sirens outside my window. I don't know if you can hear that. I hear
I
fire
can,
engine.
yeah.
Yeah. So it felt like that. It felt like I was an emergency responder. If the siren turns on, you're on. You're on, and you don't have any rehearsal. And I have another story to share. Maybe it was I forget exactly which year it was, but there was an unfortunate and very alarming gun shooting
Oh.
in Eaton Center.
Mhm.
Eaton Center is just down the street from the Four Seasons Center of Performing Arts. And we were in a double show, Saturday matinee and a Saturday evening, I believe. What year was this? And Benjamin Bowman was our concertmaster. And he retells this story on social media as well. And Ben is now in the Met Opera. And so we were performing a world premiere of a ballet called Hamlet, from the composer, contemporary composer in New York. And the first act was just strings, piano, and percussion. In fact, there were chains, I think, coming out of the piano. And of course, I was not involved. It was the concertmaster, principal second, principal viola, and principal cello, bass, etc. So I knew that I had to be an understudy. So I took the music and looked at it, right? And I even said, okay, you know what? I better, just in case, show up to the rehearsals. And I remember showing up to the rehearsals, and one of them looked at me and she kind of laughed at me. "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, just, whatever, just gonna watch the rehearsals." So she just kind of laughed, like, "You don't need to be here." But I watched at least 2 rehearsals, and it was a very contemporary score. And then I went to have dinner after the matinee. And I was going to go in, I don't know, can't remember, do something. I just finished my dinner, literally washed my fork and finished washing my hands. Ben came in from outside, and his eyes were wide, and he said, "Lynn, I'm really, really sorry. I cannot play tonight's show. I just saw a shooting in the food court at Eaton Center. He and his wife were there, and they had to flatten on the floor and hide under chairs and tables." And so he was in shock, quite literally. And then I went into shock. I was just shocked to hear that there was a shooting just down the street. But I also in shock because I had to step up and play this part that I had never played before, ever. So I went into the pit, I looked at it, and I managed it. I remember there were quintuplets and crazy things. And David Briskin is our conductor. And I do remember coming in one entry just slightly early. And I was so thankful that he just looked at me with a very reassuring face and said, "Now's your entry." Thank you. And I remember that first act ending, and my left quad had been shaking the
Yeah.
entire show. But yeah, I led the second act, and the whole show ended, and they all clapped for me. It was so frightening, Leah. It was so frightening. Yeah, and then I was really really quite tickled when David the next day we had a rehearsal for the next program, and he said that he had mentioned what I had done to management and the orchestra, and I was very touched that he had mentioned me, that what I had done was very hero like, I guess, for that occasion. It
Mm-hmm.
was scary. Yeah, it was scary. So I do have some of those very, shall we say, traumatic stories from the pit. Stepping up, yeah.
So the ballet job's about half a year.
Yeah, it's part time. It's part
Yeah.
time. We have a guarantee of 120 services in the year. We start in November for about 3 weeks. Then we go for a run in December for Nutcracker. And then we go again. We're dark for January, February, come back in March. And then we're back. We're dark for April and May, and then we come back in June.
Mm-hmm. So for other performances, and because I know you do chamber music and solo things, a lot of new music, you're able to schedule it because you know those times you won't be having to work ballet.
Yeah, so then whatever comes, like, you squeeze in freelance work, opera, symphony,
Mm-hmm.
teaching. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, and so you're from Newfoundland, and
Mhm.
you went to a pretty well-known arts high school, Holy Heart of Mary. Is that the one?
Yeah, it's I mean, I don't know how well known it is, but it in our city of St. John's, it's known as the arts or music school. I don't know. Have you heard of Holy Heart in Ottawa?
Yeah,
I
we
don't know.
played. We played there. The National Arts Center played there.
Oh, in Holy Heart.
Yeah, on tour, and actually, the soloist was now a member. Is now a member of our orchestra.
Oh, Sean.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
He was a student at the time, so that was. And so yeah, we were told it's this like, amazing arts high school. I remember going in; it was this huge, thing, and it seemed really. And I know there's a lot of music in the schools in Newfoundland, a lot of singing and.
Yes, the choral tradition is strong in
Mhm.
Newfoundland. It is extremely strong. And yes, the Holy Heart. Well, I'm glad to hear that you know of it as a venerable arts institution. For me, it was always the music institution, high school institution in the city, but outside of our city of St. John's, I don't necessarily know how people view it. I know that there was, when I was a student, there was a sort of unofficial rivalry, choral rivalry in the Kiwanis Festival, which then ascends to the provincial competition, then ascends to the national level. The choirs, multiple choirs of Holy Heart of Mary were often pitted against Earl Haig Secondary School in Toronto. So I would often see the winners of these national trophies, choral trophies, and it would be often between Holy Heart, Earl Haig, Holy Heart. So yeah, it was interesting to see that. And Holy Heart did become very famous for award-winning choral performances in competitions. They toured around the world, and I was actually never really an official member of their choirs. I don't really have a great singing voice, but they did use me as a perfect pitch pipe. I had perfect pitch, so they used me as a pitch pipe, and I also accompanied them on piano. So I do remember the days of being 15 years old, and I had help pushing the Steinway. Holy Heart Mary had a big Steinway on their concert stage. We had to take care of it, but when it needed to be wheeled out into the center of the stage, we would push it out. And we were little high school kids at the time. I think the piano must still be there after all these decades, and it was nice to know that we had a concert instrument in our school and a large auditorium which you've played in. And it was also nice to know that I was given permission to skip classes. I could skip my science class, my biology class, or my math class and go practice in the practice rooms. So that was a luxury that I had almost forgotten that I had, but I do remember it now.
That's huge, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have an orchestra to play in as a violinist in the school?
Yes, Susan Quinn was our orchestra conductor as well as the choral conductor. So she's extremely gifted. educator. We all loved Susan Vink, and she's still in St. John's educating. Um, she's one of my favorite violin teachers, just music teachers in general. I never studied violin with her, but she is definitely someone I looked up to. She was just such a beacon of awesomeness in our school. I will direct her to this interview and hope she hears me. But she led so many of us through our careers, including Sean. I mean, Sean will speak highly of her, I'm sure, as well. And so many of us had such a great experience going through Holy Heart as an arts, just as an art school. There was not just choral tradition and string tradition, but there were people who graduated and got a lot of drama training as well in our high school. In fact, we have one of the people from our high school, Johnny Harris. Actually, he's on CBC national television and international fame because he's now in broadcast all over the world through Murdoch Mysteries, and yeah, Still Standing is one of his TV shows. So we have quite a bit of talent that comes out of that little school. Well, actually, it's a big school. I forget the population, but at the time it was how many people were in that school? 1,000, 2,000 people in that school. I can't remember now.
So after high school, you went to Toronto to study with legendary teacher Laurent Fenivesh.
Yes, actually, but first I did 1 year
Mm-hmm.
at Memorial. My
Okay.
first year was with Dr. Nancy Don, who
Okay.
is one half of Duo Concertante.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think of her as one of my best teachers as well. Well, I've got a lot of great teachers, don't I? Laurent Fenivesh, definitely. He's definitely my biggest influence. And I studied with Mr. Fenivesh for 3 years of my bachelor, 2 years of my master's.
Mm-hmm.
And also, in addition to summers as a teenager in
Mm-hmm.
Orford Art Center and BAM Center of the Musical Arts. So yes, when he passed suddenly, I mean, the tribute to him was astoundingly touching. People flew in from all over the world to be part of that memorial service,
Mm-hmm.
a memorial concert at the Faculty of Music. And he treated us all like his children or grandchildren, actually. And I do remember when he had his 80th birthday concert at the Royal Conservatory of Music, he was awarded a very special medal from Hungary for his, I think, achievement in the arts and his contribution to the arts in Hungary. Was it Israel? No, I believe it was Hungary. And I do remember him coming out at intermission of the Royal Conservatory. And I don't even know, maybe I was 19 at the time. He comes out, I think he was wearing a medal. And I said, there he is. There's the birthday boy. He's 80 years old. He just chuckles. And his eyes just glinted. He was very amused by my cheeky comment. This 19-year-old girl's telling me I'm the birthday boy, and he's 80 years old. Yeah, I have fond memories. He played the Beethoven Violin Concerto. And yeah, I do remember the story he told of shoes. Shoes are very important. And he said that once he played, was it Beethoven Concerto, and he put on a pair of shoes that he had not broken in yet. Mm. And he said by the end of the second movement or third movement, his feet were just swelling in these poor shoes, and he was in so much discomfort. So I remember before one of my student recitals, he said, shoes, dress rehearsal, make sure you wear shoes, your shoes. Yeah. So yeah, I remembered that ever since.
And what were lessons like with him? What kind of things did he stress?
A lot of stories came out in the lessons. I remember actually glancing at a music score on his desk, and I forget what it was exactly, but it was a bit yellowed, a bit frayed. You could tell it was quite old, quite aged. But in handwriting, you could see Joseph Sikati in the corner, in the right-hand corner. My eyes went really wide. I thought, Joseph Sikati. And he said to me, oh, yes, I have very many letters from Joe. I thought, oh my God, I'm one connection away from violin history. It was great. So he told a lot of stories. In fact, he told me this wonderful story about, I think it was Michael Rabin. Yes, I think it was Michael Rabin. And he said, okay, so this was the 1935 Violin competition, the very first one, the inaugural one. And I believe it was David Oistrakh and Jeanette Newberg who won that competition. And Mr. Fenivesh was competing in it. Now, he had told me a story that Handel's father was there. And his father came up to Michael Rabin, who might have been only 13 years old at the time, very young. He said something like, "My daughter is going to win," and very threatening, very menacing, very competitive. And anyway, I think the competition ended, and Mr. Fenivich said he went over to check the results, and he's looking, and he said, "I was very happy with my whatever place it was." And sure enough, Michael Rabin did not place, or he did not do as well as he thought, and he was devastated, absolutely devastated. So Mr. Fenivich was telling me the story in my lesson. So Mr. Fenivich at the time must have been 16 or 17. He told me he was about that age. So he took little Michael Rabin across the street where there apparently was a bakery, and there was this domed glass display of confections and bakery items. He said, "Please, would you like to choose a pastry?" And Michael Rabin is sobbing. "I'll take all of them." He took all of them. It was such a cute story. Yeah, it was such a wonderful story. But yeah, a lot of stories came out of the lessons, and he really stressed the integrity of my practice sessions. I remember he had told me, once you close the door, nothing else exists except for your practice session. He knew that sometimes I would get a little scattered. He also knew that I was prone to practicing very quickly, too rapidly. And this is now part of my teaching philosophy on how to practice better. He would always stress that if you're practicing, make sure you're doing it with quality so that you're not ingraining any poor habits and you're not furthering your undesired results, so that you're actually cementing them into your neural pathways. I mean, he didn't use that terminology, but that's what it is. We're making sure that we're leveraging neuroplasticity, not ingraining poor habits, but we're practicing slowly enough so that quality is being ingrained into our neural pathways. So that was already a big lesson for me, for someone who tends to be, let's say, impatient, ambitious, wants to get there faster. And so he encouraged me to slow down. He also encouraged listening with the score, playing and studying from the entire score. And this is so important. Studying from one part only. I mean, now that we are orchestral players, you and I just see one slice of the entire piece, right? We just see one part. But and so it's easy to forget that the entire symphony is an entire work, and just one little silver line inside an entire piece of art. So Mr. Fenivich was very adamant and encouraged a lot of full score study. And he also told me to do a lot more singing. And he told me a story of a pianist, I forget what the pianist was, who literally sung the opening of Chopin A minor piano concerto over and over and over in her head until she got it right. And he would encourage me to do the exact same thing. So I was studying Sibelius piano concerto at the time, just studying in my head, singing in my head, looking at the score, trying to feel where it fit in. And I take that to heart now. Actually, it's nice because I have a childhood pianist right there, and I can take the piano score and then learn the bit of the piano part and put the two parts together. And that really shapes how I learn the violin part or understand the harmony. And then I'll understand, wow, that is an augmented sixth chord, and I see it's a German chord. So then that shapes exactly how I will vibrate, color, even just kind of create a nuance in the phrase. Is the phrase going to be dependent on the harmony dissolving or creating more tension? And these kinds of things can really come out of in-depth study of the score, and actually getting to an instrument where you can actually plunk things down chordally in a chord sense. Because as a melodic instrument, we only play one line, so it's easy to forget what is underneath us harmonically. So Mr. Fenivich was very, very good at encouraging that kind of all-encompassing approach to learning music. So that's what it was like with him. I felt like that I was working with a father figure who was very encouraging and very loving, but he never really gave a lot of praise, which I think is a bit of old school teaching. If I got a very good out of him, I was over the moon. Yeah. Over the moon. Yeah.
And so you played piano all the way through high school. You were quite advanced with piano. How did you balance that with having enough time to practice violin?
That's a good question. I started waning after the age of 15 because I that was the summer that I went to National Youth Orchestra, the one summer that I went to National Youth Orchestra. And I didn't have a piano. I was on the University of Guelph campus, and I was there to play orchestra. And I think I had one violin book, maybe it was Schubert impromptus. And I think I had encountered in the 6 weeks it was, National Youth Orchestra, I found a piano. I thought, oh, there's my chance to practice the piano. But that was just that one time in one summer. So I hadn't touched the piano in the entire summer. Actually, I wasn't even 15 yet. I was 14, almost 15. And after that pivotal summer, I decided I'm going to make violin my instrument. After, I would say, at least a year or two of my music teachers encouraging me, I think you need to major to concentrate on one instrument. So it was a real dilemma for me. Which one should I make my primary instrument? So finally, it came that summer. Violin was going to be it. But my parents said, please, you cannot quit piano, not just yet. Go until at least your end of high school years. So I would show up to my piano lessons with my teacher, Christina Suter. Hi, Christina, if she's listening. Christina Suter was she's just retired now as a professor of piano at Memorial University. And she was great. She's a fantastic musician. And I would show up to my piano lessons with her. She knew I wasn't really interested in studying the piano anymore. I think I barely learned Debussy L'Île Joyeuse on the piano, poorly, really poorly. And so she knew that I wasn't really concentrating on really practicing the piano. So I was practicing more the violin. So I think she said, well, what am I going to do with this girl for the next hour? So I do remember that she would pull out a book of Beethoven symphonies for four hands, piano four hands. So that's what we did. We just kind of cited these things in our lessons. I thought, poor her, I'm wasting her time. She knows I don't want to be a pianist. But it comes in handy. Now it comes in handy. Yeah,
I'm sure you got a lot of
handy. So even, pardon me?
I just thought like being able to read through those symphonies that would be actually really valuable.
I can't read full scores though. I mean that's a skill that I never developed. There's a lot of skills that I haven't developed. I mean, I don't know. A lot of classical musicians can't improvise. This kind of stuff. Can't read a full score. Can't transpose at sight. It's funny because we'll encounter non-musicians who think, "Oh, can you play this? Can you play that? Can you play that pop song? Can you play?" And I feel a little sheepish to think I can't really do that. So it just goes to show you that even though you and I are musicians, we can't master every single skill that's out there as a musician. I mean, can I sing and play at the same time? No, but someone else could, right? A singer-songwriter can definitely play and sing, play an instrument and sing at the same time. So it's interesting how the perception from a non-musician will look at us and say, "Oh, can you make up something right now?" And I thought, I'm a classically trained musician. I need to look at a piece of music, I need to practice it. It's interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting.
When you were talking about closing out the outside world to focus on your practicing, we didn't have cell phones back then. So that aspect was taken away. And I think it's a bit of a conflict now because some people use their metronomes on their cell phone, their tuner, they might listen to recordings. So do you encounter that with your students? It's a bit of a tough thing, right?
Oh, for me too. Yes, that phone is absolutely 100% a distraction. It's a terrible distraction. So turning on airplane mode is the least I can do. And even then, you can always turn that off, right? Go back on. So lately, actually, in the last 48 hours or more than 48 hours, generally speaking, I try to turn on airplane mode. I turn on tonal energy tuner, and I turn on in the app, I turn on a timer. Mm-hmm. So I typically have a practice journal, which I write out, and I find the process of writing out what I would like to achieve helps me focus better. Mm-hmm. So that will help me eliminate my mental distractions. So as much as the phone can be my distraction, at least I can partially use it to help me stay in line mentally. So I'll turn on a 10-minute timer, and this is my way of doing interleaved practice, which I teach in my course on practicing techniques. So I incorporate interleaving and then Pomodoro technique. So I allow myself a chunk of time to practice in 10-minute chunks, and I'll intersperse, I'll interleave the different pieces or different sections of the pieces. And then I'll build in a 5-minute break. The timer ends, I will go back put it back on airplane mode if I was on airplane with a 5 minute break, and then go back. And that seems to have really helped. So either that or I put the phone in the freezer, something like that. But that's my attempt to having the phone used as a tool to help me focus my practice. I do find the tonal energy app really helpful as well, because visually it reinforces what I'm hearing in terms of pitch, in terms of the color of the pitches that I'm getting out of my instrument. So it's nice to have that visual reinforcement.
Um, in your coaching and developing your programs, are there certain core, like you mentioned, of course, the core skills, but in terms of violin technique, are there things you think tend to be missing in terms of people refining their playing?
Yes, let me see. Off the string strokes is a popular
Yeah.
discomfort for many. I think intonation tends not to be addressed as often as it could be,
Mhm.
especially knowing the difference of going between just intonation, like, Pythagorean intonation and well-tempered intonation. So knowing that is really helpful. Um, I also think, well, actually, like I go back to musicality. I think very few music educators will really discuss musicality, and they'll build it into a masterclass setting. But it's funny because I've actually taught an entire class or entire workshop just on musicality. How does one actually build in amplifying your expression so that you're really taking an interpretation and making it come off the page? Is there a way to do that effectively? And is there a strategy behind it? Can there be a strategy? And I'd like to think that I have found certain ways, certain strategies, certain tricks, shall we say? I don't like to call them tricks, they're not tricks, but just strategies of looking at the score, looking at contour of the line, looking at harmony. This is the perfect answer to your question. I feel like, especially as a melodic instrumentalist, there's a sore lack of understanding, with harmony, what is underlying our melody. So when there's that lack of appreciation for the underlying harmony, the melody, I feel, becomes a little less intelligent, and it could be so much more expressive when understanding what lies underneath it harmonically. So that's missing. Understanding the importance of theory, because often musicians will be required to take theory in school. Sure, it's pretty dry. It can be pretty dry if you're not into theory. But if you can turn your study of music theory and make it practical, applicable to what we play in especially in solo Bach, when we understand the underlying harmony, the bass line, the inner voices, and how they change. Then when you get into the Romantic era, when you get into the incredible harmonies that come from augmented sixth chords, Italian chords, French chords, German chords, these greatly color the way I shape phrase. So when I start pointing these things out to students, then I'm hoping that they'll get inspired to really add something technically, whether it's bow speed, bow pressure, left hand, and this will help make the phrase a little juicier and the expression a little bit more satisfying, because you want that phrase to be so satisfying, and it comes from a deeper understanding of the harmony. So spiccato, intonation, musicality, those are three things that I've noticed. And let's see. And actually, I've been told injury prevention. Actually, a lot of people are very interested in injury prevention. I mean, even though I wrote my thesis on holistic health and injury prevention, I don't consider myself a person that is an expert on how to beat injury. I would much prefer to have experts come in and help set you up biomechanically, or help address the mental aspect of getting into a healthy mind frame. I mean, I do love talking about the mindsets and mental outlooks that can affect performance anxiety, but I think performance anxiety can be linked to injury prevention. So I think that everything is related.
Yeah, I agree. And I think body awareness, like I don't know, like I've done, tons of Alexander, Feldenkrais, Tai Chi, like just a whole host of things over the years. So I think people need to find different ways to have that awareness of what their bodies are doing in space. And like you're talking
Yeah.
about muscular tension, have that sensitivity.
Yeah, I've done all those as well. I think they're very helpful. When you increase your somatic education, that's incredibly important. I mean, I've heard of a physiotherapist that I was working with. She said she worked with a violist, and she said this violist is very well established in the music scene. And I think she asked this violist, "Can you please show me where your XYZ body part is, and they or where the pain is, or where you think your movement is coming from?" And that person had no idea. And that's not dissimilar to my experience either. I don't think I ever had an education on where movements come from, where I'm storing tension, where I could release tension in order to facilitate a more free bow stroke. So I, for this reason, really love body mapping. Have you ever done body mapping?
No.
Okay. Yeah, body mapping I was introduced to through Jennifer Johnson, who's in St. John's, Newfoundland. She wrote the book What Every Violinist Needs to Know About the Body. And I've had her as a guest artist in my boot camp teaching body mapping. And her book, she just released a new book, and her knowledge is incredibly useful for me as a violin educator. She's a violinist as well, and she also teaches her students. And I think her students are incredibly lucky. She herself has helped improve her own technique, but also heal herself from her own injury. And then she takes that knowledge and helps all sorts of people around the world, players in the New York Philharmonic. She's done a lot of educating in New York City. She has students and clients all over the world. But I love body mapping for the reason that it really increases the body awareness, as you said, so that when we're getting more in touch with the structure of our bodies and how it moves, from where it moves, where do movements come from, where we can find places of better balance in the spine, where we can actually more efficiently and more efficiently use our body, then somehow tension is going to be melted away in places we don't need tension. And obviously, when we have less tension, we're going to create a better sound. So I'm still digging into her books. I still watch the classes that she's taught in my own boot camp. In fact, I interviewed her on my channel, on my YouTube channel, and I still think that's one of the best interviews ever because she literally gives a free body mapping workshop on my YouTube channel, and it has actually stimulated a lot of sales for her books. People from all over my social media contact me to reach her. So I think it's great. I think all of this is really important.
Mm-hmm. So do you have any advice you would give young people starting out in the profession? It's really changed a lot. Like we were talking at the beginning about entrepreneurial skills, which is something, of course, we didn't learn at all when we were growing up.
Nope. I think what you said is probably what I would mention because the pandemic has literally changed the entire face of our classical music industry. There's no doubt about it. I see that you're created an excellent podcast. I've gone online. Lots of other people have gone online. Do we have the same? Do we have the same playing field as we did 5 years ago? Absolutely not. Definitely not 10 years ago. It's completely changed. So I'm hoping that the paradigm will shift going forward for students now in conservatories, universities, and even younger, even with people who are still in, let's say, high school or younger. I hope that people will start to realize that opportunities can exist in our industry as a classical musician that do not necessarily involve a teaching studio, playing a string quartet, or winning an orchestral audition. Let's look at the example of two-set violin, right? These two extremely gifted violinists, no doubt about it, they're extremely talented, but they have leveraged the power of media and reaching millions across the world, and they have developed a viable and respectable career. They're genuine talents, and they deserve to have their success. But this is actually quite amazing because it can serve as an inspiration for people studying now and dreaming about their future careers. Or even now that we're establishing our own careers, we can actually think in in that way as well. Because look at this career being made through leveraging a social media platform, YouTube, or even Instagram, LinkedIn if you want, Snapchat, Facebook. Any of these platforms can be monetized. Once you get monetization, then and hard work behind that monetization, and a bit of smarts, a bit of education, a bit of training, it is absolutely possible to forge your own possible career. And that's precisely what I learned at the beginning of the pandemic. Do we have to wait for the phone to call? Do we have to wait for an email to arrive before we get paid? I think that's an old paradigm. So what I would say in answer to your question to the next generation of musicians coming up, I think it's important to start thinking a little bit outside of this old-fashioned box. Sure, if you are setting your sights to win an orchestral audition, great. However, do not close the door to other possibilities. What are your strengths? What can they be used for your own personal career development? And they can be. If a musician is really good at technology, who's to say that you can't be a performing artist as well as a video editor, audio editor, or even a social media marketer, social media manager for somebody? Or you could be extremely great at public speaking and then go into a platform called like Twitch and live stream from your own home 3 times a week, earning advertising dollars. This could be your income, if not a full-time income, at least a part-time income. I think this is really important and quite possible. I mean, with the advent of TikTok, people are making lots of money being TikTok stars. I think it is quite possible. It just requires a bit of creativity, and I would hope some new education in the educational institutions. I would personally like to see more entrepreneurial-minded courses, business-minded courses in the music institutions, because I don't think it's realistic to train everybody as a concert soloist or even orchestral musician coming out of conservatories and university. The jobs are getting fewer and fewer, and let's face it, with the pandemic showing us that orchestras are suffering, let's look at the reality here. To be coveting an orchestra position, it's great, but it's getting even harder to get that. So I think it's easier. I think I've proved that it's getting easier to make your own professional path, going off the time-worn path, the path that people have traditionally coveted. I think it's time. It's time to start thinking outside the box, perhaps collaborating with people in the business world or in other art forms. I think it's important to think that way now.
It's interesting with all this online music because it became so crowded with all of us going online all at once. Mm-hmm. So what do you think were your most effective strategies in order to make it through all the noise of everyone else putting out similar things?
Well, I guess you could argue both ways. It became crowded very fast, but is it really? As a classical musician, we're part of a very small niche group in the population. Because if you and I walked into a grocery store, well, let's say you and I didn't shop in the same grocery store. Let's say you walked into a grocery store. How many people would you think in that grocery store is a classical musician? You'd probably be the only one. So it may seem in our bubble that we have a glut of classical musicians going online and broadcasting and live streaming. It may seem like that, but in reality, we are still a very small slice of what's there out online. Let's look, for example, video gamers. They probably dominate a big sector of YouTube, right? And we're still a very small niche sector. Mm-hmm. So I'd say from my point of view, the more the merrier. I'd say bring it on. Let's get everyone out there. Let's try to popularize our art form. And I think two-set violin is the greatest example. I have encountered instructors in my salsa dance world. A salsa dance instructor said, I follow two-set violin. I don't even play the violin. Can you play 24th Caprice? Because he's a salsa instructor. And he's asking me, can I play Paganini 24? Because he has followed two-set violin. So, I mean, if you want to become, let's say, popular or cut through the noise, I think the best answer to that question is to be genuine to yourself, because there genuinely is no one like you. And that takes a bit of discovery. when you find out who you are, where your strengths lie, and I guess in the process, you're going to discover where you're not so strong. You don't have to broadcast where you're not so strong. Go ahead and focus on where you are strong. Do you have a, a, like an interest, an underlying interest in art? Do you have an underlying interest in hip hop? I don't know. It could be anything. In cooking, there's a violinist I know who's mastered Baroque violin and cooking as well. And so you can put these two together, create your own identity. There you go. You've cut through the noise because you are unique. So I think it is absolutely possible for every musician to do a little bit of self-awareness exercise and discover, where exactly do my strengths lie? Where am I unique? I mean, you've done precisely that. You've launched your podcast. This is where you're unique.
Yeah, so I launched my YouTube right when the pandemic started just to help my students. So I have almost 1,000 videos on my YouTube. I've recorded hundreds and hundreds of etudes, all the road caprices, gavniettes, beginner stuff, scales, and I have all these violin tips. But for the longest time, I had 10 subscribers. So, now I have just over 500, but it's been very slow. And, I offer lots of like free pedagogy workshops and master classes, and I've been doing really amazing connections all over. But I don't have to rely on it for my income. I actually have a job, and this is like my side thing, which I enjoy. But yeah, a lot of people said to me, "I don't know why you're not bigger," and I was like, I have no idea, how people like. I think that is a little bit noisy. I do think there's a lot of things out there, and some of the stuff I recorded, I just didn't think there were people explaining things clearly enough, or there wasn't a good enough version of whatever it was. So I thought, let's do it. So yeah, that's what I mean. Like, I think you've done very, very well. Like a great product and wonderful explanations, but I do think it's crowded. I think there's a lot of.
I guess you could say. I mean, I would, in answer to that comment, I would say that it doesn't hurt to take a few courses, study as much as you can. I've taken courses myself on YouTube, Instagram, and I'm constantly reading what comes into my inbox in terms of educating myself on the intricacies and the newest developments in social media. That doesn't hurt to stay abreast of what the changes are. I'm certainly not the best at leveraging algorithmic changes, and that's part of the equation. You may have the best teaching delivery, you may have the best videos, you may have a great explanation of how staccato works in the bow, but if people can't find you, then that's a shame for them, isn't it? So part of the equation is learning what exactly are these algorithmic beasts all about. So you may have to consider playing the game, right? This is what I mean by saying that students now coming up, how can they learn? How can we, all of us, you and I, and students coming up into the next generation, how can they appropriate some of these, let's say, 21st century tech savvy strategies so that they can take their musician skills and put it on a platform that is visible? Yeah, so I think to leverage the skills that we have as a musician, we need to also shore up some very crucial skills that come under the umbrella of entrepreneurialism, marketing, self-promotion. Because if you have all of the amazing technical and musical skills, they're not going to be as visible as easily. Maybe you will shoot up into stardom easily, but for many of us, it's very difficult. So there is another subset of skills that does require a little bit of attention. And I treat that as if I'm learning a new instrument. So just as I'm learning that scale, this arpeggio, that etude, that concerto, if you take the other bucket of entrepreneurial skills, I'll look into that bucket and see, oh, I have to shore up on my copywriting skills. Then I have to look into how to manage my YouTube channel. I see I have to learn how to create a better graphic. Okay, so I'm going to learn how to use Canva a little bit better. Oh, I see that there's some intricacies on the latest developments on Instagram or Facebook. Ads are now changing on YouTube. And what's the best way to keep people watching your channel? All of these things are little tiny things that I can start to learn little bit by little bit by little bit, as if I'm learning and practicing another instrument. So I think it's important for musicians nowadays whether you're already established in a career, and particularly if you're an up and coming musician wanting to start your career, to start looking at these skills that you can add to your complete toolbox, because they're only going to help you get ahead. So to cut through the noise, maybe it's not so much as cutting through the noise, but appropriating some new skills that can help um, leverage, boost your visibility. So I think it's not a bad idea to look at where we can learn. And that's why I love being a perpetual student. There's always something new to learn, and it doesn't have to be in terms of the violin.
For sure. Yeah, growth mindset, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it never ends. I personally think we never stop growing until we're 6 feet under the ground. It never ends.
Well, thanks so much for your time today. It was really interesting talking to you.
Thanks, Leah. I really appreciate you asking me to be on your show.